are talking Aiyai, Wrathful Soul, also known as Wraith of Souls. Now this is an Australian movie and is essentially a paranormal, ghostly mystery horror. It focuses on this Indian guy called Kiran who gets a new job at this kind of very old funeral home, and he's lost his previous job for some reason because he got into some type of altercation. Anyway, he starts this kind of new job, and there seems to be some type of presence that is in this kind of funeral home that takes a interest in Kiran. And as we learn through the movie's progression, there may be connections to other characters within the story as well. What will happen? Well, you just have to watch the movie and find out. So first of all, let's discuss what I think worked with this movie. So, let's talk about this Australian horror and what works in it first of all. There is a seed of a good idea here in regards to a spirit seeking revenge against the living from beyond the grave and how it kind of ultimately goes about that. And I have mixed feelings about the story, which we'll discuss in a little while, but there is nonetheless some type of an interesting mystery here. The way it's executed is not quite as good maybe, but there is an idea here I think is solid. The thing I liked best about the movie though is the character of Kiran, who is a very likeable and affable character. I feel like we could get a good sense of who he is and you know what his kind of personality is like, and he does make for a kind of likeable, if wet behind the ears kind of character who seems to just be really used by kind of people around him to a certain degree. And I kind of enjoy his character and does come across as somewhat sympathetic. There are a couple of creepy moments in this movie. The movie isn't out and out kind of like horrific, gory. There are a couple of kind of jump scares and there's a variety of different kind of like spooky moments within the movie. They're relatively kind of like low impact, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, there are still a couple of creepy moments. I think that kind of the backdrop of having this kind of film set in this kind of large cemetery is very effective and obviously makes for a kind of great location for a horror film. And the director here tries to do some interesting things in regards to having some shots that are kind of a little bit artistic, shall we say. I have mixed feelings about it, but nonetheless I do appreciate the attempt here to have a little bit of mixing it up in regards to trying to have a little bit more of a distinctive voice in the plethora of kind of like low budget kind of horror movies that we can get out there. There's, let's say, two instances where I think, okay, the director's thinking, how can we make these kind of shot more interesting? And the shots are interesting. Take me out of the movie a little bit, nonetheless, but they are interesting. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work. I think the big thing for me is the execution of this story. The scene of the story I think is solid. The idea of this kind of this character of Kiran ultimately being kind of used to exact revenge ultimately, and kind of him being the conduit, if you will, of this kind of particular kind of spirit who kind of wants to achieve certain things. But the narrative structure here is very confusing. It's kind of mixed with a number of kind of flashbacks. It's not always clear when you're kind of watching a flashback, for example. The narrative flow, unfortunately, is a little bit kind of muddled and all over the place, and thus makes it at times kind of feel you don't really know what you're watching, and it feels confused. There's a number of characters that seem peripheral and are introduced and don't really have anything to do. For example, his roommate and his girlfriend, I wasn't even sure what their relationship was, to be honest with you. We're introduced to these two characters, and they're so thinly kind of like filled out that I just didn't know who they were. Like, are they a couple? Is that his girlfriend? Who are they? What's the relationship? It does a very, very kind of poor job of establishing characters. And even like other characters as well, we have this kind of groundskeeper, and he's all kind of mysterious and like won't go in the kind of the buildings of this kind of cemetery home. Don't know why. It's never kind of expanded upon. It just is. So there's a whole kind of like bunch of kind of like things that this movie kind of introduces and then does absolutely nothing with. Now, the film is so concerned with kind of being mysterious and trying to bury the lead in regards to what's actually happened and what the mystery, it ultimately trips over itself and kind of becomes confusing in its plot, having kind of multiple kind of timelines kind of being jumbled up as the film progresses, because it doesn't want to kind of reveal what has happened kind of too early. But, you know, I appreciate that the movie kind of wanting to say the kind of the reveals towards the end of the movie, but unfortunately the journey to get there becomes confused and muddled because of it. I think there is a lot of coincidences and people seemingly having crossed paths, which seems, you know, a mite kind of coincidental at times, and people seem to have relationships when, you know, you might not think they're going to, and it, you know, they just seem to, everyone seems to be connected somehow, and it just seems a little contrived about how they kind of got there. The acting is a mixed bag. As I said, I quite like the character of Kieran, who I actually thought did an okay job, although he's strangely kind of sidelined here as the kind of in the movie's kind of third act. You almost feel he kind of disappears from the story. There's a couple of other kind of actors who I thought did an okay job, but there's also some performances that I felt were kind of weaker and kind of like seemed a little bit cheesy. And the next thing I'm going to say is a mild spoiler. I'll try and be as vague as I can. Ultimately, the kind of the presence, this kind of like this spirit ultimately wants to kind of get justice, shall we say? But how it does it ultimately seems to be at the cost of someone who is innocent. So it might seem like just desserts in regards to where the story is going, but it seems to completely derail someone in the kind of the meantime who had really nothing to do with it, and ultimately seems like, well, okay, vengeance may have been served, but ultimately it's come at the cost of someone who is very altruistic at the end of the day. So it kind of, you know, it doesn't really seem like it's almost worthwhile to a degree. The movie, again, isn't particularly scary. It has some effective creepy moments, but never really going into truly kind of scary kind of territory. And I think there's a little bit of a missed opportunity having kind of this great location to kind of really make this a gothic and dark, kind of moody kind of story, which ultimately kind of fails to do, being relatively kind of light on the horror, almost feeling like a kind of like an afternoon TV movie at times. I don't think it's necessarily a bad film. I've seen some of the reviews on this film. They either been a 9 or 10 out of 10 or a 1 out of 2. 1 out of 2 out of 10, and that's, to me, that neither one of those is accurate, in my opinion at least. I don't think this is a particularly great movie, but I think it's possibly just a slightly below average one. So I want to give this one a 4 out of 10. I don't think it's a car wreck. I think it has some elements that are you know, that are okay, but ultimately the story for me was the worst thing here, because I think it was executed in a very kind of poor way. And this definitely needed to have a more, like another producer on it to kind of maybe look over this and things like that. But it's a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.